Look, a topic that's been on many people's lips following the pandemic and prior to the pandemic as well, actually, is this idea of well-being. And in education, another W word that crops up quite a lot is around the idea of workload. And an area that's sometimes forgotten by teachers is the workload, particularly of the people who make the magic happen when it comes to ensuring consistency of access and high quality resources around technology and to support teaching and learning, and all of those other actual, sometimes unseen sort of functions that run within an organisation, from your HR to accounting to your social media to the infrastructure with the Wi-Fi, all these different things. So we thought it was a really good idea here at NetSupport to have a conversation with somebody who really knows what it's like, right at the virtual chalk face of making things work with technology within their organisation. So it gives me great pleasure to welcome someone I've known for many years now, who always talks an awful lot of good sense when it comes to leadership and teaching and learning with technology. I won't sort of tell you too much about his history. I'll let you hear from him about what it is that he's been doing in his career that's led him to the point he's at right now. But it does give me immense pleasure to welcome to Tip Top Tips Edu, Gary Henderson onto the show. So welcome, Gary. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to come and share some tips with us today. For those people that don't know you, Gary, do you mind just sort of sharing a little about yourself and your sort of journey in education, please?
Yeah, certainly can. So at the moment, I am the Director of IT at Millfield. So that's a large independent school in Somerset. I'm also an Association of Network Managers in Education ambassador. So my journey originally back in 1998, I qualified as a trained technology teacher up in Scotland before moving south of the border to the northwest of England, where I basically joined a FE college, where I was teaching both on their computing and IT FE, and also some of their higher education programme. From there, I sort of returned to secondary education in a school in the northwest as an ICT across the curriculum coordinator before a period moving out to the Middle East as a bit of an educational consultant, initially working with schools in the United Arab Emirates. And then over time, I sort of found myself doing a little bit less teaching and working more on the kind of IT technical side. So I found out there, I started working with brand new school builds, looking at the actual IT infrastructure that was being put into new schools. And then eventually in 2015, returning to the UK and to Millfield and to the role that I'm doing now. For a long time, I've been interested in obviously the kind of educational technology side. So I've done a variety of projects over the years as a teacher, as a middle leader, as a senior leader. I'm also really interested in the kind of digital citizenship and the preparing our students for the future and for using technology in a safe and secure way, and in relation to kind of cyber security. So as a result of that, I hold a number of kind of information security and information technology risk management certifications in relation to that, because I think that is becoming increasingly kind of critical. So that's a kind of short summary of what I think has been quite an interesting journey so far.
And you clearly are really experienced. And what I love about you, Gary, and an accusation sometimes leveraged at people who have hold roles similar to the one that you hold now, is that they don't really have much experience in education. But nobody could ever, argue that case with you, coming from with your teaching background as part of your journey. You mentioned, Gary, in there some of the things that you see as sort of being trending topics: digital citizenship, cybersecurity, all these sort of things. And you also, I think, mentioned something about your writing and sharing. We first came across each other on social media and sort of connected on Twitter. But over the years, I found your blog to be really helpful and valuable. We talked before we went live about them being ramblings, but I see them as being more like musings, because as you often sort of share, we don't have all the answers, but part of the solution for us is to have the conversation to help us form our points of view and the best routes forwards and all those sort of things. So um, those are some of the benefits I see as someone who reads your blog and subscribes and enjoys what you share and what have you. But what benefits do you see as someone in your role as being the benefits of sharing on the blog? And have you got any tips for anybody sort of wanting to start getting blogging in your sort of a role?
Yeah, I think, I mean, for me and my kind of blogging journey and sharing journey, I kind of go back to kind of 2012. I think I was out in the United Arab Emirates, and a colleague at the time introduced me to Twitter, and that's where I sort of started. And I found myself, sat there, following what other people were doing, and being the kind of the person sat on the side watching. And it was after a period of time I just thought, well, hold on, if everybody does that, if everybody sits and watches, then nobody's writing the content that people are watching. And I just decided at that point, well, hold on, I need to basically contribute. And it may be that people will find it interesting and read it, but at the very, very worst, um, I'm blogging, I'm writing and contributing for myself, because it's really, really useful to be able to look back on what you thought and what you said at a particular moment in time, because we quite often forget how our views change over time and how our approaches change over time. And at least by scribbling those thoughts down, um, I've got that record. And I think another thing about it is that I quickly realised that actually having to write things, to write a blog, for example, you actually had to sort of order your thinking, and it forced you to actually, question your thinking at times. So I thought that was beneficial for myself. And then you get the replies, some of them, the positive replies that like what you're saying, and that's nice to hear and confirmation that you're of your thinking. But you also get the people challenging what you've said, and I think I've found that also very, very useful in forcing me to rethink, or quite often to see different perspectives on the situation. So all of that being beneficial. In terms of tips, I think the one tip I've always said is just get started. There are lots of tools out there. I mean, free tools. I use WordPress. I find that nice and easy, but there are loads of others.
Mm.
And just get started. Just write. Just share, and just build from there. People will read it. People won't read it. You don't know, but the best thing is to each of us are individual. Each of us have got our own experience, skills, views. So each of us have got a voice. That why not share it?
No, absolutely. I think we talked about imposter syndrome off air before we came on and things, didn't we? But I think you really elicited or extolled the benefits of actually doing it just for yourself. People sometimes say to me, who do you want to read what I'm writing? But actually, if you're writing for yourself, and that opportunity, like you say, to frame your thoughts, get your thinking in the right order, I find that process really cathartic and really helpful personally when I'm writing, to best support the people that I'm working with. And sometimes as well, I don't know if you find this, Gary, with yours, when I was writing, when I was teaching, some of the things I was writing about, it was when a colleague had come to me with a problem. And actually writing about it not only would help me come up with a solution, but like you said, it helps me frame my thinking, what would be the best approach. And then by sharing it out there, it allows you to have the sort of balances and checks. Like you say, you do get feedback, and some of the best feedback, actually. Like you say, it's lovely to get yeah, that's brilliant, and what a great idea, and all this sort of stuff. When you get challenged on your thinking, I think that's a really positive thing. There's a lot of echo chambers on social media, aren't there? But if you've got a good PLN, I think it's really important. I don't know what you think, Gary, but having people in there who do challenge your thoughts, your thinking, I think it helps keep you honest. What do you think?
I think you're right there on the echo chamber side of things, and to be honest, that fits into my kind of discussions with kind of on digital citizenship, and are our students kind of as aware of the echo chambers and the danger there in relation to social media. I think you're right. I think often there is more value in the people that challenge your thinking constructively, and I have to note that I do see some people challenging in a not constructive manner, but challenging constructively constructively, I think there's quite often more value in that. And I think, going back to the point about, really kind of why is it important to share, and why did I think it's important to share? There's a phrase I keep coming back to, and I quite often use it when I talk at events, is the smartest person in the room is the room. And I'm not sure who said that originally, but that's it. So if more of us, whether it's directors of IT, network managers, whether it's teachers, middle leaders, the more of us that are sharing, collectively we are better by it. And that's one of the reasons I decided to share, because I thought by adding another voice, hopefully I would add at least something. Maybe if it is one blog in a couple of hundred that is well received and makes people think, and then brilliant, I've added something.
No, brilliant stuff. And it seems we're on the same page, although unfortunately a bit of an echo chamber in our conversation. But I think it's that respectful dialogue. We do see people who don't have that collegiate kind of challenge and can be quite sort of dismissive and things. I don't think that helps the conversation much at all. And it can have an impact on teachers and other education professionals around one of our topics for the conversation today around well-being, that the impact of some of them. I mean, I saw just one just the other day. This poor teacher shared something, and there was a proper Twitter pile-on. There was just no need for it, By all means, have a respectful conversation, talk about things in a collegiate way, because that's the right thing to do, really, isn't it? But we're all in the same business. We're all trying to help young people, we're all wanting to improve outcomes for everybody. Why can't we have those respectful conversations? It seems sometimes, for whatever reasons, people just can't do that. So it's not so easy sometimes to deal with all those things. I mentioned the well-being word a second ago, Gary, and we're talking about workload as well. Millfield, I know, as a local school to me, it's a big campus, lots of technology on site that you've got responsibility for. You clearly will be facing lots and lots of pressures, which will change on a sort of day to day to month to annual basis and what have you. But just for the audience, if you could, Gary, could you just sort of share some of the pressures that you do face, and then alongside that, perhaps some tips for how you sort of manage that workload?
Yeah, I think we like lots of schools, or like all schools, are often very busy and very dynamic, and that from the technology point of view, that's one of the challenges. So you've got your strategic things that you need to be working on, whether that's things like PC replacements and Wi-Fi upgrades and network switching upgrades and that kind of stuff going on, and those are kind of planned in. You've got some sort of timeline on that. Then you've got your IT incidents, when things go wrong, when the network switch goes down, or when you have a friendly squirrel, which is the animal of choice in this area. The friendly squirrel chew through some fibers. You've got those kind of issues, and then you've got the events that reach you somewhat last minute. Yeah, there's a presentation going on, or there's an event going on. It starts in 10 minutes. Can you get this set up? And you've got all of that going on. So it's I think one of the big things is it's never it's 2 days are never really the same. It's constantly changing. It's constantly dynamic. And I think one of the challenges sometimes from an IT point of view in relation to all of this is that IT teams can be the people behind the curtain that make things work and are never really seen, even though we're working busy to keep things working, and then are only seen when things go wrong or when something's urgently required. And when I think about the kind of how do you kind of manage this, I always think of that urgent and important diagram. I think that was Covey. And that's it, and for me it's about kind of watching particularly watching the important but not urgent, and that they don't creep up and become urgent and important and something you need to get done immediately. I think, within my team, a couple of years ago, I started using keywords to sort of frame, what we should be doing. And at the moment, the three keywords we've got at the moment are entropy. That's I think that's not being a scientist. I may get this wrong, so somebody can correct me, I'm sure, but that's the kind of second law of thermodynamics. It basically says, in a nutshell, the world will tend towards chaos unless we exert energy to try and keep things going. And that's the reality. Things are always changing. No matter what we do, things will go wrong, and we just have to be ready for that and deal with it. I think our second keyword is reasonableness. We will do everything we reasonably can to make sure the technology works, but sometimes there are things that are outside our control. If Microsoft have an issue, for example, and sometimes there are things that take such huge resources or that are unsustainable going forward into the future, and therefore that we have to basically measure everything up about whether it's reasonable or not. And the third keyword we've got at the moment is just simply prioritization. There are times when you can't do everything, and priorities have to be established, and some things will take priority over others.
That's really interesting, Gary. How do you sort of share those sort of keywords? Because it's the balance between in your primary kind of customers, as it were, with the function you support within the school, are going to be your teachers and probably the students who are your boarders, right? So how do you manage that not necessarily distance, but because you said earlier in your response about being invisible and then only being visible when things don't quite work, right? So one of the difficulties I found working along colleagues such as yourself before is making it really clear to all colleagues about professional interaction, because that can sometimes not be as professional as it could be, but then sort of sharing those processes and procedures and around those different things. How do you balance that, Gary? And you've got some tips around that sort of thing?
I think one of the things for me on that side of things is just being being reasonably clear about what we're here to do. So I mean, for us, we've got a very clear set of kind of values that my team are aware of, and it's central to everything we do, but that are also communicated outwards. So we've got 5 value statements. We focus on the user, and that's what we try and do. Deal with whether the users are parents, students, teachers, middle leaders, whoever they are. We focus on the user. We communicate. Try and keep that. We innovate, we protect, and we look to seek value, and therefore in the discussions with people about that we can't deliver something at a particular moment in time, we can go back to those values and say that's because the thing you're asking, there might be some security risks there, and we need to evaluate that first under the protect value. We need to deal with that first before we can move forward. Or actually what you're proposing has a huge cost for it. So yes, we see the benefit, but the huge cost, our value is about seeking value, so we need to question that. So I think for us, that's been one of the key, I feel that's been one of the key things, that we are clear on what our values are, and that's known throughout the school. So my team, in any of the discussions and where there are where there are issues, we can come back to those values and say, well, actually this aligns with those values, and this is why we're saying or doing what we're doing.
That's really helpful, Gary, and I'm sure lots of the listeners will take an awful lot from that around those sorts of conversations and how you frame those responses back around those different values. Really useful, Gary. Thank you. We mentioned workload a little bit. Have you got any sort of further tips around sort of managing workload, and are there any sort of IT solutions that can help with that?
I think one of the big IT solutions really is the kind of use of an IT help desk of some sort. So an electronic help desk that can log the calls, etc. And because I think, from my point of view, as a director of IT overseeing an IT services team, that gives me a lot of data about where things are going well, where things are not going so well. It gives me some data on trends and issues that common issues that are happening, and it might be that there's a training need there or something else. So I think the that kind of help desk software is pretty critical. I mean, personally, finding ways to actually, manage your workload and record your workload. I'm a big fan of, I use an app called Todoist, which I find is really helpful for me. Keeping records of the things that need to be done regularly, the things that need to, the little tasks that are urgent and important. I'm marking them up, and I think that's helpful. I will say that uh, you know I think each of us have got to find our own solution. I've seen some people using OneNote particularly well for the kind of managing of workload. But there are lots of tools out there you can use. It's about finding the right ones that work for you. But Todoist, having a help desk software, OneNote are all quite useful tools. I think probably one of the big things on workload is just trying to find that balance. I also think we need to look at that. We constantly look to improve in schools, and one of the risks there is that in order to do that, we quite often add things, and I think sometimes we need to put some space aside to sort of stop, slow down, look at the situations, and actually try and look to remove some things. The things that don't add as much value, or the things that we could find ways around, automate, etc.
No, I completely agree. One of the things in the work that I do with schools outside of NetSupport when I'm working with them is, like I say, schools want to innovate. They want to bring this in, bring that in, all the rest of it. But you can't just keep putting things on and on and on without removing some things as well. So I'll always have that challenge question, which is great. You want to add in that you want teachers to be doing X, Y, or Z, or members have to be doing A, B, or C. What are you going to take away to actually facilitate them having the time and capacity to actually do those additional things? Because you just can't keep piling things on, can you?
Yeah, this is exactly it. I think, and I think when we look at the well-being, kind of side of things, we only have a certain amount of time in the day and a certain amount of time in the week, and therefore, if we keep adding, one, we just don't have enough time. And two, that's when mistakes happen. So I think sometimes, and as I say, that's why within my team, that's why I sort of emphasize the reasonableness and the prioritization. That the reality is, we're all here for the students, etc., and therefore we all want to try and do everything. But the reality is that quite often isn't possible, and at which point we need to say we're going to have to prioritize, or that is a request, but given resources, given various other things, it is not reasonable, and therefore something we can't take forward.
No, absolutely, and that's those difficult conversations, isn't it? One of the things that can help those difficult conversations, though, you alluded to it a little bit a minute ago with your help desk solution, which provides you really great insights into areas where there might be problems, areas where there might be a training need, these sorts of things. I'm a big fan of systems that turn data into information. Data is information without context, and there are lots of systems that can give that data context. So it helps you know what's happening in lots of different ways, shape, or forms through the analytics and dashboards that these sort of systems can generate. Have you got any tips around systems or processes or reporting to help you keep yourself informed on your school's IT performance, so you can be proactive rather than reactive? Are there any tools in particular that you could highlight at all?
I think probably one of my, well, I was going to say, one of the big tools I think is a major, or very, majorly useful is that Power BI. But actually, before I get to that, probably one of my most powerful tools, and it's horrible to say this, Excel. The good old Excel spreadsheet and the Excel graph. But Power BI makes that so much better and makes that more interactive and more. But a lot of it is Excel. um, to be honest, I mean,
Music to
looking
my
at the
ears, Gary. Music to my ears.
there's nothing like a good VLOOKUP. But I mean, again, back to the help desk things. And I mean, one of the things I was very conscious of is what I said earlier about IT being behind the curtain. And I thought, well, how do I make us more front and center? And so that one of the things I did is I came up with, having a termly report, and basically getting, schools have so much data that you can get to, taking some of that data and starting to make that visible, and presenting that to SLT, presenting that to governors on a regular basis. And it was things like, the number of help desk calls that were being logged, how quickly they were being dealt with, the number of requests, IT incidents and outages and other issues, that and information that to give some context to what IT are doing, such as the amount of data that we're currently we've got stored, how many files have been created, the number of emails coming in and out of the school. All of that kind of data just starts to paint a picture for the likes of SLT about what is going on. And so that was one thing I started doing. And as I progressed through doing that, I then started to think, right, okay, so I've now got some data and I'm presenting. How can I start to dig into it and maybe turn the data into useful and actionable information? And that's where the likes of Power BI came in, because I could create my dashboards, etc., that would then allow the data, rather than to be more static like Excel was, to be a bit more dynamic, such that I could drill down. So let's have a look at this situation. We've got a prep school and a senior school. Let's look at the senior school. Let's look at the prep school. We had an ongoing discussion about kind of Wi-Fi. What is the quality of Wi-Fi? So being able to actually dig into that, how many users are connected, how much data is going through, is it the same in each of our boarding houses? Is it the same in different areas of the school? How does it change over time? Power BI allowed us to start digging into that, and it actually allowed some perceptions to be challenged. And it's you mentioned those kind of difficult conversations, being able to go and say, well, we're going to look to remove a couple of PCs, and here's the data that backs that up, that these PCs are not being used, and we're doing this obviously to ensure that we're operating as efficiently as possible. Or there are perceived issues with Wi-Fi in a particular area, but the evidence shows large numbers of students connected with lots of data traffic, and YouTube being used an awful lot in that area. So I'm not so sure that there is the same issue. So that's about taking that data and being able to analyze it and look into it. And Power BI for me is one of a number of analytic tools that can be used for that. I will say though, one of the challenges with the likes of Power BI is getting the data clean enough to actually be able to use, and that is a challenge. We've got lots of data, but lots of it isn't clean enough, or is not structured well enough to be used.
Mm-hmm. So how do you go about cleaning that data then, and what makes it unclean?
I think one of the challenges is that there's sometimes an assumption that I can report. That you can generate a report if you've got the data. You can generate a report that is X, Y, and Z, or structured in a particular way. And the reality is that the report is impacted by the structure of the data. So if you haven't got your data structured in a particular way, you might not be able to generate the report, and they are linked. It's not just a case of I've got the data, create me a report or create me a dashboard that does this. The actual structure of the data will have an impact.
That's really interesting, Gary. Thank you very much, and I'm getting so many tips from what you're sharing. So brilliant stuff. Thank you very much. The other W we were thinking about is well-being, and I often see, we mentioned again this off air, but I often see you sharing about your running. I know you're. I'm going to do a shout out. Maybe we can get the do a little splash with the donation link for your wife who's running for Great Ormond Street, and use that as a promotional to try and raise some money for her actions. But well-being often is a multifaceted thing. So I was wondered if there's any tips or advice or tools or approaches that you use. Whether it's Couch to 5K or whatever it is, or it could be there are some specific sort of well-being tracking tools and other bits and bobs. Are there any approaches that you could share that help you sort of manage and maintain your well-being? I think you've alluded to some of it yourself, actually, in your pragmatic approaches to how you work with your teams and your colleagues, actually. Yeah, just wonder if you could dig a bit deeper into that, Gary, if that's okay.
Yeah, I think there are various tools. There are various tools out there. You mentioned Couch to 5K, Headspace, and there are various tools out there. And I think for me, I think we need to acknowledge that we're all slightly different. We're all different, and therefore it's about finding what worked for you. I mean, I tried, for example, Headspace, thought it was quite good, but didn't really get into it. It just wasn't my thing. Couch to 5K, I tried and I struggled and struggled and struggled. And you described my efforts as running. At times, I'm not quite sure. Running it's maybe kind of propelling myself in a direction and hoping for the best. But Couch to 5K, I struggled for quite a while, and then I finally found that getting up first thing in the morning and doing it first thing in the morning. If I could be running or propelling myself, out the door and halfway down the street before I was awake and realised what I was doing, that was my best chance of being successful. For me, I enjoy reading, and I think that's another thing, about finding a bit of space for reading. I mean, ultimately, I always come back to kind of balance on all of this, and it's funny, people talk about the work-life balance, but I think work is part of life, so I'm not sure that quite works for me. It's just about finding balance in life. We've got work, we've got our well-being to look after, you've got family, you've got yourself as an individual to look after. It's about finding some way to make all of that work, and whether, for me, as I say at the moment, that is, Couch to 5K and trying to do the kind of 5K, 3 times a week. At the moment, I'm trying to do 100K in June. It's I'm trying to make sure I read, hopefully try and read a book, at least, one book a month. Struggled with that so far, and I think actually maybe that's another thing that's worth acknowledging, and I try and do that with some of my posts on social media, and that is that a lot of people just post all the positives. The reality is that quite often I go out for a run and it's a really terrible run and I struggle, and I'm quite happy to admit that. I'm happy to admit that my target for reading a book, one book every month at the moment, is I'm way short of that, and there are various reasons for that, and I'm all right with that. That it doesn't always, things don't always go well, and we should be fair with that. That's just part of life, and we need to, we again, it comes back to, some of the points for my team about prioritization. Maybe I've got to prioritize work for a while. Maybe, as we go into the summer, I'll prioritize myself for a while. Maybe I'll have a holiday and prioritize family for a while. It's about finding that balance, and I think we're all different. We each need to, do what is quite often a struggle in finding what that balance is for us.
Brilliant. I mean, you've kind of answered the sort of final question there, really, with what you shared there, Gary, because I think you're absolutely right. And one of the things I loved about your response as well was there's an awful lot of my best life kind of things being shared, and from your smile, I can see you know what I'm talking about. But there's an awful lot of value to show your humanity in that you don't succeed all the time. One of the things when I used to blog about our work at Clevedon when we were doing the iPad rollout, it was lovely to get that's a great idea and all that sort of stuff. But actually, the feedback that people gave us that they found most valuable was when we shared the things that had fallen flat on their backside and hadn't worked, because you can learn an awful lot more from the what doesn't work, or isn't what working for you, and so forth and so on, than the this resource or that idea or that app or that tool, and all the rest of it, because it's avoiding those pitfalls, and all the rest of it. And I think your conversation around balance is really, really key too, and recognizing that you know there are certain times in the year where certain things need to flex, and so you leverage when you've got the capacity to have your holidays or your family time or your running or your books and so forth and so on, because you have to be able to move it around and be responsive, don't you?
Yeah, I mean, looking at the technology space, I kind of liken it to every vendor has their case study, and you go to a presentation and somebody presents about their particular project, their one-to-one project or whatever, and we started at A, we did this plan, and then we got to B, and everything worked. And I look at those situations and say, no, they didn't. That's just it's any decent technology project never goes from A to B in a direct line. It goes to A to Z via A, B, C, D, and everything in between, with road bumps along the way and problems and challenges to overcome. And actually, the value quite often, when people present, is not the the perfect vision of it went from A to B. The value is in people being open and discussing where things went wrong and what were the pitfalls and what were the challenges and what were the changes that were made to the plan. That for me is where the value is, and it's the same with the kind of the well-being side of things. I 9 weeks ago, I started out, with on couch to 5K, and I now ran 5K in under 30 minutes. Yes, but during that 9 weeks, it wasn't actually 9 weeks, it was 12 weeks. On 7 or 8 occasions, I really felt terrible. I tripped once and fell and basically, grazed my knee and injured my shoulder. That's the reality of it.
That's it. I mean, I'm definitely, you know me pretty well, Gary. I'm built for comfort, not speed. And so I think if I was to try couch to 5K, we'd have more pictures of me throwing up on the side of the road than anything else, to be honest. But again, it's about finding balance on what works. So running for me just doesn't work. But I'm still motivated through things like the fitness app on my watch to get up and be active. I set myself move goals. I try and walk, 5K a day. I'm not going to run it, but the fact that I'm walking 5K a day is certainly better than not doing anything across the course of a day. And like you say, it's about finding your rhythm, what works for you, and how you can achieve that balance yourself. And it is difficult. You do, when you've got a busy day. I mentioned
Yeah.
my day yesterday, didn't I, Gary? I was in Peterborough all day working at NetSupport head offices. I didn't get home until the wee hours this morning. And so fitting my 5K walk in yesterday just didn't happen. But I'm not going to beat myself up over that. I'm just going to get on and crack on and do it today instead. Happy
I,
days, I think.
I
You've
think it
gone.
also links to I had I presented on cybersecurity in an event recently, and we were
Yes, you
talking
did.
about
Yeah.
this, and the idea that we want to be perfect, and try and get to 5K. The reality, I think we all need to look at is that just do something. With cybersecurity, the discussion was we all want to be secure, but the reality is you can never be 100% secure. It will never happen. And it's a moving target as well. And personal fitness and things like that, we'll never be 100% fit. That's never going to happen. And it's a moving target as well as we get older and as jobs and other requirements change and things like that. So the reality is, just find something, and whether it's walk a little bit more. I'm going to walk more this week than I've done in the past, or I'm
Mm,
going to I'm going to at lunchtime I'm going to take a wander around the campus, or I'm going to start going to the gym once a week, or I'm going to go for I'll do the first couple of weeks of couch to 5K. Just find something and do it, or I'm going to set 30 minutes aside to read twice a week. In
mm.
well-being, I think that's what it is. It's about the incremental improvements rather than big steps, big jumps.
Yeah, and then you know me, Gary. That rings massively with my marginal gains love, and when you add up those little things, as we all know, they can start to have and make a big difference. Listen, Gary, thank you so much for taking some time to chat with me today. There's so many great takeaways. I'm going to wrap up in just a moment. Before I do, though, you mentioned the ANME and your involvement with them. I'm just going to share for the audience the ANME website address down the bottom there. We're big fans of the ANME at NetSupport as well. Could you, with your sort of ANME hat on for a second, sort of share a little bit for our audience if they've been hiding under a rock or something and haven't ever heard of the ANME? Could you share a bit, particularly given around our topic around workload and well-being? What sort of benefits do you gain as being somebody involved with the ANME, given the role that you've got, Gary?
Well, I mean, the Association of Network Managers in Education is a free-to-join organisation for, your IT staff, your network managers, the director of IT, etc., and those kind of people. I mean, the well-being side of things, it is a lovely network sharing ideas and challenges. And the reality is, and I think you said it earlier on, Mark, about us all being in education. We're all in it for the same thing. We're all in it for for the teaching and learning of kids. And therefore, by using the NME, we can share and help each other. And it's that, the smartest person in the room is the room. And I think, also through that, where there are kind of those challenges and things like that, where things are a bit difficult, whether it's making a particular change, within the technology space, the NME allows you to reach out to other schools and colleges and find out kind of what did they do? How did they approach this? Have they got easy solutions to this, or ideas, or suggestions? And I think that's very, very useful. And there is also it offers a bit of a social side. At the end of each term, we have the kind of online come together in the NME pub. Where we kind of write all the kind of the wrongs and come up with the ideas and have a bit of a social get together of people in similar roles in schools in different contexts all over.
Yeah, brilliant stuff. So if you're listening and watching and you're keen to find out more about the ANME, clearly I'm an advocate, as is Gary. If you're listening, the website to visit is anme.co.uk. And if you haven't heard that and you can just see the ticker scrolling across the bottom, the website address is there. If you didn't catch it before, you can, of course, follow Gary on social media at Gary Henderson 18, which is also scrolling across the bottom at the moment. And if you'd like to read some of Gary's musings on cybersecurity and well-being and all sorts of things, current affairs related to teaching and learning and leading with technology, his blog can be found at techandlearning.wordpress.com. Listen, Gary, thank you so much for taking the time to join me for this conversation today. Yet another rich conversation. Thank you very much indeed. And was there anything else you wanted to share that I've missed out before we wrap things up, Gary?
Well, I think for me, I think it is all about, and I think even during the pandemic, it's been really, really clear. It is all about I think sharing and working together, and it's back to that point about the smartest person in the room is the room. So the more I can encourage whether it's teachers, whether it's network managers, etc., to share, work together, collaborate. I think together we are so much stronger, and I think that's what I've sort of finished with, Mark.
Great stuff. Well, thank you very much again for taking the time out of your busy schedule and day to spend some time sharing on Tip Top Tips Edu. Thank you so much, Gary. And thank you to you for listening. We'll be back soon with another episode. And if you feel like you've got some tip top tips you'd like to share, you've heard Gary extolling the virtues of sharing and thinks, you know what? I'm going to join in on that. Please do reach out to myself. You can find me on Twitter at ICT Evangelist. You can always get in touch with us at NetSupport via our netsupportsoftware.com website. Or alternatively, you can drop me a line on mark at ictevangelist.com if that works for you that way instead. But for now, it's me, Mark Anderson, and I'm getting smashed in nicely now, Gary. I've been talking with Al last night on a Check It Out show. But thanks from both of us for taking the time to join us on this episode of Tip Top Tips Edu. Thanks, Gary.
Thanks, Mark. Cheers.